end the shadow of the gallows at Fort Smith. Justice was swift and often final. Between 1875 and 1896, Judge Isaac C. Parker ruled over the Western District of Arkansas, his courtroom extending across 74,000 square miles of Indian territory. But behind the judge's infamous reputation as the hanging judge stood a force of courage, grit, and integrity, the deputy U.S. Marshals who carried out his warrants. Among them was a man history nearly forgot. Rufus Cannon, a black lawman who rode the same dangerous trails as Bass Reeves. Grant Johnson and Rufus's own contemporaries of color who brought justice to the frontier. Little is known of Rufus Cannon's early life, a familiar tragedy for African Americans born before the dawn of Reconstruction. What records suggest is that Rufus may have been born, enslaved, or in bondage during the 1840s or early 1850s, in or near Arkansas or Indian Territory. The end of the Civil War brought new opportunities and new dangers. Freedmen were suddenly citizens, but freedom did not guarantee safety. The frontier was lawless, and native nations still recovering from forced removals faced their own struggles for order. For men like Cannon, the badge was more than a job. It was proof of citizenship, courage, and equality. When the U.S. Marshal Service called, he answered. The deputy U.S. Marshals of Fort Smith had one of the most dangerous duties in America. They were responsible for tracking down outlaws across Indian Territory, a land larger than modern-day Indiana, filled with dense forests, bandits, and fugitives. Most would not live to retire. Rufus Cannon's name appears in Parker's records alongside other black deputies. Men like Bass Reeves, Grant Johnson, William Billy Bowlegs, and John Bearcat Johnson. These were the frontiers enforcers, black men with stars pinned to their chests in a world that still denied their humanity. Cannon's inclusion among Parker's deputies is significant. It reminds us that African Americans were not just participants, but leaders in establishing law and order across the West. It's believed that Rufus Cannon often rode with Bass Reeves, the most famous of Parker's marshals. Together, they ventured deep into Indian Territory, chasing horse thieves, murderers, and whiskey runners. The marshals traveled hundreds of miles on horseback armed with warrants, rifles, and courage. They carried prisoners back in chains, often leading lines of outlaws through miles of wilderness to face Judge Parker's court. Each trip could take weeks. Each arrest could mean death. Cannon was known among fellow deputies for his precision and restraint. He rarely spoke of his captures, and yet his reputation as a marksman grew. He preferred to bring men in alive. For Cannon, justice wasn't vengeance, it was duty. Through danger and prejudice, Rufus Cannon endured. In the eyes of some settlers, he was still a colored man with a gun. By the early 1890s, the frontier began to close. Oklahoma neared statehood. Indian Territory's wild days were fading. Judge Parker died in 1896, and with him ended an era of justice unlike any other. The gallows fell silent, the badges were retired, and the names of the men who served men like Rufus Cannon slipped quietly into the dust of history. Today, historians continue to uncover the stories of Parker's black deputies, brave men whose service redefined what it meant to be American in the 19th century. Rufus Cannon stands among them, a silent symbol of courage, loyalty, and honor. History remembers those who leave their mark, but justice remembers those who protect it. Rufus Cannon's name may be faint in the archives, but his legacy endures in the strength and spirit of every man who dared to stand tall in a lawless land. He was one of Judge Parker's own. He was a black deputy U.S. Marshal. He was Rufus Cannon. If you enjoyed this story of a forgotten lawman, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment which hero of the Old West you'd like to hear about next. Your suggestion might be our next frontier legend.